focus instead on what
let's play some damn chess.
As I find that to be the most encouraging part of what he has to say.
Bitch.
Gavin and I are not so far apart as I am from most apologists. Perhaps because we come from similar backgrounds and have studied much of the same material. But despite being aligned on many issues, we still disagree
we're going on to
what
a podcast
is the most
with this
fundamental
lady
one. Let's
at either 3:30 or 4:30. The invitation she sent me was at 4:30.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Today we are looking at Gavin Ortlund. His channel is called Gavin Ortlund Truth Unites. The About tells you little more about him than his homepage. His intent is to promote gospel assurance through theological depth. So we are not the intended audience. Gavin's goal is not to spread the word or reach the lost, but to assure the already convinced that they have been convinced of the right thing, because the world will certainly tell the faithful otherwise, including me. I guess that makes me part of the world. Gavin inherited his ministry to a certain extent. He's the son of Ray Ortlund Jr. and the grandson of Ray Ortlund Sr., both big names in Christian apologetics in the 70s through 90s. His grandfather more so than his father. But it's Gavin's grandmother that I was most familiar with in my days as a believer. She wrote Disciplines of a Beautiful Woman, which is still available on Amazon, and from the reviews, people are still buying it, which I find ironic, because even as a believer, I didn't buy it, figuratively. I did buy it literally. She says in there that there are 24 verses in Proverbs 31, the chapter about the ideal woman. Therefore, a Proverbs 31 woman should divide her 24-hour day in accordance with how the Proverbs chapter does. The section has 2 verses about beauty. Therefore, a woman should spend 2 hours a day making herself beautiful. Absolutely ridiculous. First, Proverbs 31 has 31 verses, not 24. And if you focus on the part that's about women, then it's 21 verses, not 24. Next, most women don't have the luxury of spending 2 hours a day on making themselves beautiful. And even if I did have that kind of time, which I would if I stopped making videos, why would I? Why would a God care what I look like? After all, the Bible says, man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. So I'll keep on making videos. How I look isn't that important. So that's my experience.
Okay, let's play some damn shit.
Anywhere where he talks about his grandparents. He stands on his own ideas. Good for him. However, he had a head start in his rise to prominence by riding family coattails. But coattails alone aren't enough to get you this kind of fame. You also need some charisma and scholarship, which Gavin has. Unlike Jimmy Wallace, who is struggling to hold on to the empire built for him by J. Warner Wallace, Gavin can hold his own. So let's see what Gavin has to say about evangelicalism fracturing.
I'm recording this in early 2025. We do see some great things happening. We're going to talk about that. But overall,
Hold!
Even that term, evangelical, is
it's
not clear what that means at this point. It's
taken on different meanings. Lots of people are uncertain about whether to use that.
He's bringing out that whore.
Language is fluid, words change in meaning, and the term evangelical has certainly evolved in the last few years. When I was a believer and I saw a church that claimed to be evangelical Lutheran, I had my doubts. What I saw as evangelical was contrary to what most Lutheran churches were doing. To me, the term meant that your church's focus was on bringing people outside of the church into the fold. The church was outward-focused, not inward. Since a more liturgical service, the type that you usually found in a Lutheran church, was not a
what a dork!
I saw any church with a
Now I'm not letting him get away with it either.
However, in the younger
I'm putting his ass right. Stalin and abandoning the games, and I ain't talking Joseph Stalin either. Slut. Shut it!
Even if the meaning of the word evangelical was not evolving, what is evangelical would be.
let's talk about what is happening and then where to go from here. This video is my attempt to put some hope and vision before people who would identify as evangelical Christians, such as myself. You know, if we could all huddle together in a room and sort of talk about what's happening.
Simple. Just give up and go home.
But seriously,
I don't think what Gavin proposes is even possible. If you got all the evangelicals into a room together, they would be so divided on theology. I doubt they could agree on anything, even who should be admitted to the room.
Big picture, what's the big power things basically going in the church? And what should we be striving for right now in 2025? What would that be to the company I hope Truth Unites is serving? And I would say renewal in the church, and revival, and recentering on the gospel.
If that were possible, it should have happened by now. I heard our preacher talking about the same thing 20 years ago. If there really was a God that cared about what people believe, first you need to wake your God up and get him off his duff to start doing something. He's been sleeping.
Get up off that thing!
I lost my best friend. This is a miracle.
I know.
Look, he's
Wait, did she smell spit?
God.
Spit. Smell Christy. Wow, well, she smells like spit.
A miracle.
Wish
I know.
Look, he's waking up.
pit smell. Wish
Best friend. This is a miracle.
I
pit
know.
smell.
Look, he's waking up.
Wish pit smell. Man, now she's got spit arms with spit arms.
God.
Hey, it's me. Welcome back.
Man, she smells like
So on and
spit.
so forth. We'll talk a little bit about this in this video. In some respects, this video will give you an orientation to my heart's desire with what I'm trying to do with Truth Unites. So, this is a big picture video looking at everything. I've been reading The Decline and Renewal of the American Church by Tim Keller. This is, I think, it might be, someone can correct me in the comments. I think it's the last thing he wrote. It's not really an official book, but you can download the PDF, sort of a white paper, after his book on forgiveness. I think this comes out around the same time or a little after. And it's basically talking about the state of the evangelical church, especially in America right now. And his diagnosis is pretty dire. He uses the term intervention. The church needs an intervention.
Oh, I
church needs an enema.
I could get together a bunch of my atheist friends to crash your little room and provide the church with an intervention to demonstrate why your God beliefs simply aren't true. We'll start with the fact that no God would stop us. Next, we would move to the fact that no God showed up to participate in the intervention. We would end up with the fact that with prayer, you are unable to get any divine guidance on what you're supposed to do. Sure, some of you would pipe up to say that God told you something, but as Larry Sanger told
Today I'm speaking with Kelly Pearsall. Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we've been trying to do this for a while, like I say, with so many interviews, so I appreciate finally getting a chance to meet you. I've seen you on YouTube quite a few times already, so it's an honor to finally meet you in person, so to speak. And I'll just use that as part of my intro for Kelly. Kelly is a fellow YouTuber. She goes by the handle Godless Granny. I'll have the link beneath our video, so you can go over there and like and subscribe and check out her great content. Kelly lives in Alabama, but she's originally from Wisconsin, and she did live for a while in Indiana.
Get that
She
damn
studied at the
bitch out of
University
here,
of Wisconsin La Crosse, and she has a Juris Doctor from Baylor. She has 3 kids and 5 grandchildren, and she's also a court-appointed special advocate volunteer. She also has a transgender son, and we'll talk about that as part of her story in a little bit. But besides that, what else could we know about you, Kelly?
Well, I spent 6 years training for a race at one time. I was a triathlete, and I did a full triathlon in 2012.
Wow. What does a full triathlon entail?
It's a 2.4 mile swim, a 120 mile bike, and then run a full marathon. Although my spine was already starting to deteriorate, so I ended up walking the run with a cane.
That's amazing. I don't know if I could do that. That's crazy.
Like I said, I spent 6 years training for that one race.
That's awesome. Well, kudos to you. Putting me to shame here. Well, in terms of the interview, we're obviously here to hear your story. I'd love to just give people the floor to kind of tell us the early stages of your worldview. I usually jump in with a lot of questions today, so I'll jump in some, but as you can probably hear, I've lost my voice a little bit. So I may not ask.
I'm facing that ear. You're rude.
We're here to hear your story, so take us away.
Not cutting off your right ear.
Early in my childhood, I was Catholic. My parents were both Irish Catholic, and so we were good Irish Catholics. But my parents left the church when I was 7. At the time, I didn't know why or what that was all about. But eventually, I found out that it was over the issue of birth control. My parents had 4 children, and that was as many children as they wanted. The next door neighbors had 8 children. They were also good Catholics. And my parents realized that as quickly as the children were coming, there were going to be plenty more, and they didn't want any more. My parents realized that they had a choice between either leaving the church or getting divorced because they didn't want any more children, so they decided to leave the church. My dad at that point became agnostic. He no longer believed. But my mom's religion was really kind of odd because she still believed that the Catholic Church was the one true church. She didn't believe any of the doctrine. She didn't believe what they taught. But if you're going to be a believer, then you have to be Catholic. And I always thought that was kind of weird. So I was basically raised agnostic. But my mom still believed that the Catholic Church was the one true church. As I came to my teen years, I started to question what life was all about, what the world was all about, as many teens do. And I kind of came to the conclusion that there was no purpose to life. And as a result, I started planning my suicide. And I didn't really have anyone that was close to me, so I wasn't really sharing these feelings with anyone. Nobody knew what I was thinking in these terms.
About what age was that again?
I was 16.
Okay.
And there was a guy in my English class that started sharing the gospel with me. And he did it because in this class, the teacher in this class, passed out books at the beginning of the year and said, okay, do what's in the book. I'll be in the back of the room if you need anything. And basically, we just did these self-paced books, and we could do whatever we wanted during class. And so he started telling me about the Bible because he had just
she's cute.
converted. Have you ever heard of the I Found It movement?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. There was a big revival in the 1970s, and they called it the I Found It movement. And you could see bumper stickers everywhere. I found it, and it was people who had found the gospel, and that's what this was part of. He was converted at one of these big rallies, and now he found it, and so he's wanting to tell other people about the gospel. But he's a baby Christian himself, and he knows very little about Christianity. So he starts telling me about Christianity. At first, I really had no interest in listening to him, but I wasn't given an option because he took all the books off of my desk and put them on his desk and said, "You're going to sit there and you're going to listen to me." And I didn't want to go tattle. I felt too awkward going and asking the teacher for my books back. So I just sat there and listened. And he told me some really weird stuff. One of the things he told me was that when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, that Cain killed Abel, and then Eve had to have sex with Cain because he was the only man left on the earth to have sex with, and making up all these crazy stories. But I listened to the stories, but the thing that was the hook for me, the reason that I really thought that he had something going for him here, was he told me, your life is empty, and you need something in your life. And because I was planning my suicide, and he couldn't possibly know that, I felt like God was speaking to him and telling him about what was going on with me. Now, I realize now that, that's not what was going on at all, that, this is just a common line that they use, and everybody's got some kind of issue, but that's what I was feeling at the time, and so I was very drawn to what he had to say. And he knew that he didn't know the gospel very well, so then he introduced me to a couple of his friends and had his friends tell me more. They actually use Chick tracts. I have to hang my head in shame and say, yes, I was converted by Chick tracts.
That's awesome. I think my dad was a big tract hand pass router. Whatever you call it, and he did that kind of stuff nonstop. His church would have like a big pile at the back, so you could take them with you. He'd take 50 of them, and he'd run out of them every week. So yeah, I know Chick-fil-A well.
Okay. One thing kind of funny, on my 16th birthday, I prayed that I would become a Christian because at that point I'd been convinced, but I didn't know what to do. And 3 days later, they told me the whole process of what one must do to become a Christian. And then what's really surprising is they didn't ask me to do it. They gave me the materials and sent me on my way. So I went home and prayed in my own bedroom. And I really felt like something had happened. I really felt like God had touched me, because when I got up the next morning and went outside, I was just feeling elated, like something had really changed. And I looked at the world around me and said, everything is beautiful, everything is wonderful, and God loves me. And I started seeing the whole world in a different way. And so I really felt like this was real for that reason. Now, not having believing parents and not having a church, one of the things I then had to do was try to find a church. And so I did make a couple forays into a couple of different churches. I did try, at one point I tried the Assemblies of God Church, and their big thing is speaking in tongues, and I tried the speaking in tongues, but it was fake. It was just a matter of faking it. And so I didn't really find any authenticity there.
And I had a friend. Your parents weren't really going with you or interested in it?
Oh, no. They had no interest in church whatsoever.
Can I ask what they thought of it when you shared it with them? Or did you try to proselytize or just kind of share it in passing?
I definitely tried to share it with them. At one point they said they thought I was in a cult and they needed to get me out of it, and they threatened to have me kidnapped. But it was an empty threat, and I wasn't in a cult or anything, so it was kind of weird that they even said that. But like I said, my mom always believed that the Catholic Church was the one true church. So if you're not believing Catholic, you're not in the right religion. So they always did think that, although my dad really didn't care that much. He was more of, believe whatever you want to believe. I really don't care. I had a friend at school who went to an evangelical free church, and she invited me to go to her church, and I did. But I never totally felt like I belonged there, partly because she had a rather large family. There were 6 in her family, and they took up a whole pew, so I could never sit with them. So I always sat by myself. And so, I never felt like I really belonged. She asked me to help teach VBS, which I thought was kind of funny because, I'd never read the Bible. I'd never been to church before. And so she said, it's no big deal. I'll be the teacher, you'll be my assistant, and you're basically going to do crowd control with kids. And I said, sure, no problem. And she said, can you lead the kids in singing Jesus Loves Me? I don't know that song. What do you mean you don't know that song? I haven't gone to church before. I don't know your songs. Okay, so I learned the songs. I felt like I was way behind. I felt like I needed to catch up. So the first thing I did was read the Bible from cover to cover. And I did that in about 4 months. Although I skipped the Psalms, because the Psalms, after reading about the first 10 or 12 of them, I said, these all say the same thing over and over. I think I can skip this. And I was really absolutely flabbergasted when I found out that other people hadn't done the same thing. I was in a Sunday school class with other teens my age, and one of which was the pastor's daughter. And we were looking something up in a concordance, and I don't remember what the word was, but it began with a V. And so she was reading the concordance, and she said, okay, this, and there's a verse. No, the V stands for the word that we looked up, that we're looking up. Do you not know how to use a concordance? I mean, you're the pastor's kid. I'm, a new convert, and I know more about it than you do. So that was kind of weird.
That's amazing. It's amazing, too, that you've read it almost completely cover to cover at that age, because I know a lot of people would say they've still not, even if they've been Christians for decades, they just, kind of pick this little passage, that little passage, but to read it through once, let alone several times for many of us, it's like it's unheard of, which is really weird if you think to yourself as a Christian, this is God's most important way of communicating to us. It's His love letter. Like, why wouldn't you read it cover to cover? It's mind-boggling.
I was an avid reader. I read everything I could get my hands on. So that's part of why I did that. One thing, when I went off to college, then just a couple years later, that was an exhilarating experience also, because in high school I did feel limited in how often I could go to church. I went to church on Sunday, but I was never involved in youth group or anything else because my parents thought that was too much. But when I went off to college, now my time was my own. I could do whatever I wanted. I joined Campus Crusade, InterVarsity, Campus Bible Study. I went to a different Bible study every night of the week. I didn't keep that up for long because once school started and I got into my studies and I had homework and stuff, that was too many. So I cut it back to Campus Crusade and Campus Bible Study, and eventually just Campus Crusade. And eventually Campus Crusade spit me out. But that wasn't until my sophomore year.
In terms of they didn't like you, or you were just burnt out?
No, what happened was, when I first started with Campus Crusade as a freshman, I heard a young woman say, Campus Crusade is all about out with the old and in with the new. And they really don't want me anymore because I'm not new anymore. And I had no clue what she was talking about at the time. And I felt very welcomed by Campus Crusade. And I went through their basic training class and was doing all kinds of stuff with them. But then when I came back as a sophomore, the first meeting was very like my first meeting as a freshman, and they gave everyone this test. And the first time I took the test as a freshman, I didn't know what all the answers were because I didn't know the correct Christian terms for various things. But now as a sophomore, having been through their basic training, I knew all the answers and filled it all out. But then they assigned me to the basic class, and I said, why are you assigning me to the basic class again? Basically what it came down to was one of the people on staff was a single woman, and so she lived with several other sophomores and upperclassmen in a house. And all of the women that lived with her got to be in the leadership class, and anyone that wasn't in the leadership class got sent to basic class. And I wasn't one of the in-group, so I got sent to basic class. Now I understand what they mean. It's out with the old and in with the new. You're not new. We don't want you for leadership. So, if you want to go take the basic class again, fine. Otherwise, we have no use for you. So that was the end of that.
Like a little Christian clique.
Mm-hmm. It was. It very much was.
Can I go back
and bring this phone right here.
I did want to ask. You talked about your salvation story.
Mm-hmm.
When you were at the point where you placed your faith in Christ personally, you're obviously, like you said, going to church, you're involved in these places where they're giving you education about Christianity. What was it like there privately? Like, were you praying, and just how did you feel behind the scenes when it wasn't public, it was just you and God? Like, was there a closeness that was happening?
Oh, yes. I definitely felt like I had a relationship with God. I really felt like God was speaking to me through various things, through people, through the Bible, through literature that I was finding. I really felt like I had some kind of a connection with God.
Interesting. It's very common for, I think, most of us at that age stage, especially based on the groups you're describing for me that you were with, where they preach it very heavily and make sure you're aware this is not a religion, it's a relationship. And you get that message, but you also kind of form your own worldview around it. And did you ever feel like God was actually talking to you, not necessarily audibly, but just that He was sending you messages, even if it was just
Oh, yes, definitely. Especially, there was one time when it stopped, and there was a time where there was a problem with it. Do you want me to skip ahead to that? That's 1984. That was the worst year of my life.
Okay, whatever place you want to go to next is fine.
Okay, well, we can skip ahead to 1984. Yeah, that was the worst year of my life. I was married in 82, so my husband and I were young married. I got pregnant, and my husband was in the Army, and he got sent to Kentucky to Fort Knox for a 6-month course. And then we were supposed to move back. So We moved to Kentucky while I was 7 months pregnant, knowing that we were only going to be there for 6 months. So we didn't have any friends there. We weren't looking to set down any strong roots there because we knew we were only going to be there for a short time. And the baby died. I had a stillborn.
Her dog died! Her dog! Her dog! Her dog! Her dog died! Her dog! Her dog died!
I carried the baby dead for 3 weeks before I delivered. And my water broke 5 days before I delivered. And when my water broke, this was my first pregnancy, I wasn't sure what was going on. But I went into the doctor and I asked if maybe, do you think my water broke? And the doctor said, yeah, that's possible. But that was the end of it, Now, my mom was an intensive care nursery nurse. She was a neonatal intensive care nurse. And so she was talking to some of the doctors, telling them what I was going through.
I'm coming at that damn bishop.
Saying, this is not right.
That fucking pony.
She should not be carrying a dead baby for this long. This baby is decomposing inside of her, and this could be a threat to her health. What's more, the water breaking, and I'm now susceptible to infection. This isn't right either. And so I went to my doctor and I told him what advice I was getting from my mom and these other doctors. The doctor got angry and stormed out of the room and never came back. And I never saw that doctor again.
Wow.
And then on top of that, when I went in and delivered, I was the only patient on the floor. And yet they let my IV run dry, and I was bleeding into my IV. I received such poor health care there. It was absolutely horrendous.
Wow. Hard to even think about.
Yeah.
Let alone the emotional side of it you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I tried so hard to push her out on Saturday night, and I couldn't get her out until about 20 minutes after midnight. And the doctor, or the nurse asked the doctor, why is she so concerned about getting the baby out before midnight? The doctor looked at her and said, because it's Mother's Day. She's right. I had a stillborn baby on Mother's Day in 1984. And for a long time after that, I had a very hard time talking to God. Why does God want to take my baby? I've done all the right things. I want to serve you. I want to be your child. Why would you take my child? And there were no answers. And I did eventually find a book called Loving God When Life Hurts, or something like that. And I went through that, and I was able to repair my relationship with God. But what really was the biggest shocker of all was during that time we took a trip to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where my husband and I went to school. And I went to see the pastor at the church that I went to while I was in college. I had been very close to some people in that church. I felt very much like I belonged in that church. I was very active in the college age group in that church, and I was just absolutely shocked when I told that pastor that I felt like when I pray, I'm hitting a wall and nothing's happening. And his advice to me was, I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically it was, it's your fault. If there's a problem with your relationship with God, that's your fault. You need to fix it. He was not helpful at all, which, I used to think that he was a really good pastor until that point. And that was probably the first fracture of my faith. There was a huge change in me emotionally at that point. My emotions essentially turned off. And I have a hard time feeling much of anything. Some people will hear me talk about things in my life that are horrendous, and I'll relate them with no emotion whatsoever. And they're like, how can you be so stoical? And it's because of this event, I don't feel a lot. It's also why I don't listen to music. The one time I can feel something is when I listen to music. But music affects me so profoundly that I can listen to a sad song and be depressed for days. And so there are certain songs that I consider dangerous because they will make me suicidal. And so Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, Starry Night, and the theme from MASH. Those three are the most dangerous pieces of music ever written. They will make me suicidal. So I kind of picked up the pieces after that. One event that happened that really made me feel like God was in my life and was working with me was something that happened not too long after that. When we moved out of Kentucky and back to Texas, my husband actually traded assignments so that we could go back to Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas, because we did know some people there. He asked for a compassionate reassignment so that we could go back and be with friends. And we actually had not sold the house. We had bought a house in Killeen, Texas, and we had not sold it. We were renting it out, so we were going to move back into our old house. But while we were going back, the Michael Jackson exhibit had just opened in, I think it was at a wax museum. I think it's in Nashville. I have to look at a map to see what's the largest city between Fort Knox, Kentucky, and Killeen, Texas. I believe it's Nashville.
God fucking damn it.
And as we were driving through, we were on a 4-lane highway, and 2 lanes of traffic were at a dead stop because cars were lined up for miles to go to this Michael Jackson exhibit. And there were 2 lanes that were moving at normal pace. And because we were moving, my husband and I were driving separate cars. He was in the car behind me. And we both had cars just loaded up with stuff. And somebody pulled out directly in front of me from a dead stop while I was moving at 65 miles an hour. And I could not avoid that car in front of me. And so I was, as I said, I was completely all in on this. I was 100% convinced that if I died, I was going to heaven. So at that point, I closed my eyes and I said, "Hello, Jesus, here I come." And then when the crash,
Stupid!
I opened my eyes back up and I looked, and the car that had been in front of me was behind me. And there was one more lane next to me, and there was a red truck, a small red pickup truck in that lane, and that's why I couldn't move over. And next to the truck was a concrete wall. And I had no idea what happened. I went on and got off at the next exit and got out of the car. It was shaking like a leaf. And I asked my husband, what happened? And if he hadn't been there to tell me, I would not have known. But he said, what happened was that red truck moved as close to the concrete wall as it could, and you went right in between the 2 of them. And I was sure that an angel had taken the wheel and had controlled my car at that point. And that is one of the things that really convinced me that God was real and God was with me.
Jesus goddamn fucking Christ.
Mm-hmm. I always wished I could find the driver of that red truck and thank him for being so skillful in saving my life.
Yeah.
Jesus.
So at that point, the questions that were in your mind about why is life working out so well, at that point they kind of got pushed back aside?
Yes.
Heavily?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I did in reading through that book, Where is God When Life, that's the title, Where is God When Life Hurts, is it says, go to the foundations. What is the basis for your belief in God? And for me, the foundation was the Bible. I said, I know the Bible is true. And because I know the Bible is true, I know God is there. And even if life doesn't make sense, I can get through it because I know the Bible is true. That was my foundation. And that also is what set me up for the failure of my faith years later. Because I was able to identify exactly what it was that was the bedrock of my faith.
I was just going to jump in for a second with a couple quick comments from what you've shared so far. The thing about your pastor saying, the reason you feel far from God, it must be your fault. I had something, not exactly the same, but parallel to that with my pastor. I grew up in a church that was probably similar to the Evangelical Free Church. It was not denominational, but close enough. But I had a very severe case of insomnia from the time I was just a little boy. Very, very severe. And it seemed surfacey at first, surfacing in the sense that this isn't related to anything Tim's doing. It just kind of happened to him overnight. But as I got older, in my teenage years, this pastor was into, there's a book called The Body Keeps Score, or something like that.
Oh, I know that book.
Yeah, and he was really into it. I don't know if it's a Christian book or not, but he kind of merged whatever that book's message is with his theology, and he basically said, like, you would be able to sleep well if you didn't have sin in your life, and if you were at peace with God. And so he basically said, like, look, I'm not going to mince words with you. We know now is that, you're getting to be an older teenager, and you haven't slept well in years. Like, you don't have any good night's sleep for years at a time. That's not normal. And he said, your body is keeping score because you have sin between you and God. This is a blessing. God won't let you get away with sin. And I wasn't doing anything, like that. It was a thing that literally years later, a doctor fixed it with no medicine, like almost overnight. And it really made me reflect back on that experience of how for years I thought, what's my hidden sin? But I was going to add one other incident that I sincerely hope it isn't too painful to mention this, but it definitely brings to mind my experience with the whole issue of a baby passing. When I was still a Christian, the very last church that I went to here in Atlanta was a Presbyterian church. It's called Perimeter Church. And quasi-mega church. It's really expanded over the years. But the pastor this one night was preaching through some sermon, and somehow he came up on the topic of babies dying. And I don't remember exactly what the full context was, but he told a story. And he was actually retelling. He said, I told this story a month ago, and I got a lot of pushback from a lot of people, so I want to say it again and make it crystal clear what we believe as a church. We're Calvinists. He's like, I'm going to make this clear. If you didn't hear it the first time, you're going to hear it again. And he said, this woman came to me she had a baby. The baby was born, but it died sometime like in the first year of its life. And she came to him for counseling for grief. And he described this as like a pivotal point in her healing. I don't know how it could possibly be healing to have heard what he was about to say, but he described it as she didn't really heal until she heard these words. And his words were, he counseled her, ma'am, you're not going to be able to put this in the right mental, intellectual, emotional bucket until you get your theology straight. Your theology must be, your baby deserved to die. All of us deserved, like none of us deserved a life. The fact that you're living and I'm living, the fact that we've had this very hour of breath is a grace from God. None of us deserve 1 millisecond of our lives. And so he was telling this lady this, and in his words, it helped her to heal. But ever since I heard that, I remember at the time thinking, theologically, of course, I agree, we all deserve to die. But man, what a thing to say to somebody. Like, what a mind job to tell somebody, especially when they're in the throes of their grief, to tell someone that. It really shook me up, honestly. It shook me up both because I imagine what she was feeling, but it shook me up to think at the time, I actually agree with him. But it was very, disturbing to think I agree with him, but what do I do with this? You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. There's an interview on Atheist Edge channel where there's 6 of us in the interview, and one of them is a Calvinist. And there's three of us that are atheists, and there are 3 believers. And we got into a discussion with the Calvinist, and this topic came up. And I asked the Calvinist, of course they believe in predestination, that everyone that God chose before the foundation of the world is saved, and anyone not chosen by God is not saved. And I asked him, if you knew that God did not choose one of your children, that one of your children was predestined to hell, how would you feel about that? He said, I'd be fine with that. And I said, you're fine with your child being tortured for eternity. And he said, as long as I know why, yeah, that's fine. And I wish I would have said, at that point, I was just so flabbergasted. I said, you lost your humanity. But what I wish I would have said was, Don't ever let your child hear you say that. How damaging would that be to your child to hear that you don't care if they are tortured for eternity? I just feel so bad for his children.
Yeah, that's crazy. I had something similar to that, and I'll keep it short, we can get back to your story, but I had something similar years ago where during my early stages of my deconversion, my wife basically, to keep it very short, my wife said to the kids right in front of them that if they lived in Bible times, and you know the passage where it talks about if your children are disobedient for a long time, you can just go stone them to death. I know it's probably in context referring to like adult, teenager, adult children. But still, if your children disobey, take them to the rebellious, take them to the elders, and then you start stoning them to death. And she said, my wife, who's still a fundamentalist Christian, she said right to our kids, right to their faces. She said, if I lived in Bible times, I would absolutely obey Yahweh. I would stone my kids to death. You have to obey Yahweh. And I remember at the time thinking, like, even if you believe it, you don't say that to kids, hopefully you don't believe it, but if you have to believe it for some reason, that's the kind of stuff that messes with people's minds. So what happened next in your story?
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. I stayed within the church. My husband got moved to Arlington, Texas for a year. And, let me back up a bit. When we came back to Texas, for a while we lived in a small town on the west side of Fort Hood called Copper's Cove. And our pastor was absolutely adamant about liquor. He felt like alcohol was the demon. And we lived in a dry town, in a dry county. And it came to the city council that there was a restaurant that wanted a liquor license, and they recently voted to allow liquor by the drink. And our pastor made an absolute ass of himself at the city council meeting, telling people how evil liquor was. And we ended up leaving the church over that because I was just so embarrassed by the things that our pastor was doing. And he was on the front page of the newspaper for the things that he was doing and saying. And I thought it was so funny that he was telling us, well, you can't go to another Baptist church and have them not agree with me. And no, we went to another Baptist church on the other side of town and had no problems.
Do you recall if the township, whatever, was able to let the restaurant move forward?
The restaurant got their liquor license. Yeah.
I'm sure that made the pastor super happy.
Oh yeah, he was furious. A little later, let's say, before, when we were still in Killeen, Texas, we helped found a church. Now, the church that I had gone to in Wisconsin was an evangelical free church, and I'd always felt like evangelical free was really the denomination I felt closest to. And when we were in Texas, there were no evangelical free churches there, so we were usually going to Baptist churches down there. It was about as close in theology as you could get to E-Free. But we found that there was a group of people trying to form an E-Free church in Killeen, so we jumped in with them and helped them found this church. And we were not elders, but the elders called the pastor. This was the worst pastor that I ever had. He was the most misogynistic pastor that I'd ever seen. And
now, buck up and move that bitch.
I even went to one of the elders' wives to talk about it at one point. I said, Pastor doesn't seem like he really cares about women. He seems to consider women to be, just servants of men. And her attitude was, yeah, we understand, we just ignore him. And I thought, how could that be the attitude of the elders' wives, that we just ignore the pastor because we know the pastor's wrong? My second child, my second child was born while we were members of that church. And I would not let that pastor dedicate my daughter, because I did not want my pastor dedicating a daughter with the attitude that he had toward women. To give you an idea, if you ever watch my video, the 10 dumbest things I ever heard from pastors, his is the number one, which was the sermon that he did on the verse that says that women are saved through childbirth. And he gave about 6 different interpretations of what this verse could possibly mean. And the one that he chose as being the correct one is that women are saved from worthlessness. Because a woman without a child is worthless. And I even called the pastor out on that. I invited him over to talk about it. I said, we have a woman in our church who is barren. You just told her that she's worthless. And it was a very small church. There were only 40 of us. And he said, well, maybe worthless wasn't the best choice of words. And that's as far as he would go with it.
Nice job.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much, I mean, I'm so far removed from some of it. In some ways, I'm glad that I'm removed from it, obviously. But, when you reflect back on some of that, or you hear something new that comes up, it really does shake you, not just to hear the messaging, but kind of like those ladies that you talked about, the elders' wives, like, why are you putting up with this? Like, and why are you comfortable passing it on to the next generation? Especially the misogyny. Like, you realize, like, if you as a woman really want the men around you to speak like this, or that's just what you're used to, that's just you in your own worldview. But if you're going to bring little girls up in this and make them think that this is normal, like, just the toxicity is overwhelming. And it's when I talk about this a lot when I share my story. One of the things that kind of happened with me with my deconversion was these, what I would call tears of impact.
Stupid!
The main impact was like,
yep, I'm talking about
mythology, learning the mythology of the New Testament, especially, and the Old. All kinds of issues there. But then,
because that was
secondarily, there was like this issue of when I would bring it to Christians, they wouldn't care. They were like, I don't like, and I'm like, but it's really good information. Don't you want to know if it? This is like, if this is true, it affects the way you interpret your own Bible. Like, no, I don't care. And when you add that in a few other dynamics I can go into, but when you add it all in, you're like, there's something more going on here. It isn't just that you believe bad things. It's that you're becoming specifically and almost intentionally willfully ignorant or willfully toxic. And regardless of the topics of the day that we're addressing, the fact that you're okay being ignorant or toxic kind of makes you no longer my people. And it's funny, they don't really get that. They're like, well, I guess you weren't one of us from the beginning. If you were one of us, you'd stay with us, but you're not one of us, so you left. I'm like, no, I was one of you, but at a certain point, you have to give people, Christian or not, you have to give people the freedom to think for themselves and say, does this make sense? And if the best you can do is say, I don't care what you're saying, I'm just going to put my fingers in my ears. At that point, I truly get this sense that a lot of Christians don't realize how much that just pushes true seekers of the truth away. They're just like, this is like, you're not my people anymore. And once you cross that bridge, you're like, I can't trust you. I can't trust what you say, what your ultimate goal is, your worldview. If you get people to think my leaders are not trustworthy, or they're becoming irrelevant to my search for the truth, once you cross that bridge, it's hard to go back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is a little bit in line with the conversation that I had with my husband and the pastor of the next church that we attended. At that point, my husband and I moved to Arlington, Texas. My husband had a 1-year assignment there, so we knew that was also going to be a temporary place. But one thing that bothered me a great deal was when I watched the military and, in training new recruits, they would call men ladies as an insult. And to be a woman is not an insult. And my husband and the pastor, neither one of them got it. They were like, well, of course it is, because a man should be a woman. That's an insult. Is it an insult to call a woman a man? Well, no, that's okay. Well, then you believe that men are better than women. No, it's just, it's just bad for a man to be a woman. And I never got that through to them. They could not understand what I was getting at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, misogyny runs so deep in some of these circles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then from Arlington, Texas, then we moved to Fort Wayne, and we lived there for 22 years. I worked as an attorney for Brotherhood Mutual, which was an insurance company that insured churches. So not only did I go to church on Sunday and Wednesday, I worked for a Christian company, and our Christian company even had chapel services on Thursday mornings. So I was very steeped in Christian doctrine, Christian friends, everything in my life was Christian.
Mm. That's crazy to get doing chapel at work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. I would imagine, I don't know this for a fact, but I'd imagine like Focus on the Family, for example, they probably do something like that for their people.
Yeah, I imagine they do.
Mm-hmm. So at that point, would you say that you're in the context of, you had to ask some hard questions before, but you kind of, with the close call in your car accident story, you'd kind of gotten the sense that God was guiding you. Did you feel like there were still some big questions left, or were you still like?
No, I was very comfortable with my faith at this point. Okay. I was very comfortable in my faith. I was still all in, and it really the real stem was from figuring out that was figuring out that the Bible was the bedrock of my faith, and one of the foundations of that went all the way back to college. When I was in college, Josh McDowell came and spoke. And one of the things that he said was, nothing has ever disproven the Bible. In all of archaeology and all of science, nothing has ever disproven anything in the Bible. And I took that as gospel, and I really took that to heart. And so when I was examining the foundation of my faith, I would remind myself of Josh McDowell's words. I had his book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and the sequel, More Evidence That Demands a Verdict. I devoured those books. And I really believed wholeheartedly that what he said was true. And when I found out many, many years later, just like 2 years ago, that not only was what he said not true, it wasn't even true when he said it. That to me was mind-boggling. And one of the things that I tell to the younger generation who are like, well, how could you not have realized that it wasn't true? And the answer is because we didn't have the internet. If I wanted to check out that claim and discover if it was true, where would I go? If I went to the library and asked for archaeological finds that have not been discovered, you're not going to find that. You're going to find plenty of books on archaeology, and you're going to find books by Christians that show you what archaeological finds support the Bible. But try to find one that shows how archaeology doesn't support the Bible. It's really a very difficult thing to look for. And looking for books is not the same as looking for a search on the internet.
Mm-hmm. It is amazing that just reflecting on that, how much the internet's changed so much of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my son, now there's a huge gap between my second child and my third child. It's a 12-year gap, so my son is only 22. And when he deconverted, he was in high school, he was in a Christian school, and I'll get to that in a minute. But one of the things they made the mistake of doing was making a falsifiable claim in science class, and told him that what the secularists will tell you about evolution is absolutely not true, because we don't have the missing links between humans and apes. And so my son just quickly Googled it and found that, I don't remember what the exact wording of the claim was, but found a website that showed that what the teacher had just said was absolutely 100% false, and it took him all of 2 minutes to do it. Whereas if I had tried to do the same thing when I was his age, it would have taken me days, to go to the library and search through the stacks and try to find a book, and then find something in the book that said that exact thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like, especially with not just the internet in its infancy, but specifically things like YouTube and Facebook have made such a huge difference. Obviously, with the inclusion of other places where you can go to primary sources, but just being able to find people who've done the research and say, what have you found? What have you found? I love it. Almost like, does it ever? you would think if you'd grown up in a different era that there just would have been no way to escape. I thought that'd be like, especially if you grew up in like 1800s, 1900s, where just there was no way to get this information. It wouldn't matter what you did. There was no library per se that would have had this, where it just would have been so difficult to even begin to even think of the right questions to ask, let alone get the information. And I feel honestly kind of really glad that we live in an era when some of these mythologies can so easily be disproven and just die out.
Exactly. Yeah, I would not have deconverted if I lived 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm. No, can I ask before you go any further, was your husband asking any of the hard questions with you at any point?
No. He's still a believer.
Okay. Are you all still married?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I was going to say, I want to ask more about that, but I'll probably jump ahead. Feel free to take us back to where you left off in your story.
Okay. At that point, I was attending a Mennonite church, and our closest friends had recently moved to a Calvinist church, and they became convinced that Calvinism was a more biblically based theology. And I was becoming disenchanted with the church because the church that I was attending was becoming more and more outwardly focused to the point where the people that were members of the church were no longer important.
Just get rid of that fucking
and at first I thought it was a church issue, and it was the pastor that was the issue. That he was trying to bring our church to looking to bring people in, and then I attended a denomination conference, and I did that because my kids were both involved in Bible quizzing, and they had the Bible quizzing competitions at the conference. And when I heard the keynote, they were saying, his big speech was, the church is not about you. The church is about the people on the outside. And your whole goal is to get the people that are on the outside to come on the inside. And I was frustrated because the church was asking me to work in the nursery, teach Sunday school, and teach children's church. I said, you want me to teach through all three services and never attend worship? Yeah, that's what we want you to do. So I went with my friend to the Calvinist church instead, and I became convinced also that the Calvinist doctrine was more... I was really persuaded by the pseudo-intellectualism of Calvinism. My pastor was very into reading complicated books, Mark Noll, Tim Keller, Wayne Grudem, and he pushed, study these things and study the deeps and learn the depths of what it means to know God. And I got very into that. And the church didn't have a library, and so I wanted the church to have a library so that these kinds of books could be available to anyone. And the pastor very much encouraged me to help, and he helped me a great deal in establishing and founding a library. I had a great time doing it, and one of the things I absolutely loved is I went to a librarians conference in Wheaton, Illinois once a year, and I would buy new books from the library, and I would meet some of the publishers and see what some of the new stuff was. My pastor practically worshipped John Piper. Anything that John Piper had to say was just one level below what God had to say. And so that's why you'll see that I follow John. Well, I don't actually follow him, click on the follow button. But I check what John Piper has to say every day, and I'm always refuting John Piper on Twitter every day. And that's why.
I love that his son is so adamant, too, with his sending the opposite message. Do you follow Abraham?
I don't follow him, but I know of him. In fact, I just finished releasing a video to my patrons, and it'll be published tomorrow. And I talk about that because the video was covering the issues in the Southern Baptist Convention, and I talk about all of the issues with women being leaders in the church, and what are the qualifications for being a pastor and an elder, and all of the theological ridiculousness when it comes to, a pastor has to be married, he has to have children, the children have to be believers. And I talk about how John Piper had to go to his board and ask if he could still remain a pastor because his son no longer believed. Which, as I point out, is absolutely stupid from the Calvinist perspective, because if God has made a sovereign choice before the existence of the world as to whether or not Abraham was going to be a believer or not, how is that a reflection on John Calvert that God made this choice?
Yeah. It is. It's crazy.
The theology just doesn't make any sense.
Fuck his.
Yeah. Oh! It's interesting. I feel like someone like Abraham Piper has this sense that maybe, we just get that.
Video was covering the issues in the Southern Baptist Convention, and I talk about all of the issues with women being leaders in the church, and what are the qualifications for being a pastor and an elder, and all of the theological ridiculousness when it comes to, a pastor has to be married, he has to have children, the children have to be believers. And I talk about how John Piper had to go to his board and ask if he could still remain a pastor because his son no longer believed. Which, as I point out, is absolutely stupid from the Calvinist perspective, because if God has made a sovereign choice before the existence of the world as to whether or not Abraham was going to be a believer or not, how is that a reflection on John Calvert that God made this choice?
Yeah. It is. It's crazy.
The theology just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like someone like Abraham Piper has this sense that maybe, we say we have two on one level. We've been on the inside, like we've been close enough to, as they say, how they make the sausage. Like we know enough to be dangerous, and he certainly does, being the son of John Piper. But it's really cool to hear his insights because, I think he's got a depth to what he says that's just a little bit more precise and a little bit more razor sharp than maybe I could come up with. But I love it because, people are seeing you can grow up with this theology, and number one, of course, you can escape from it. You don't just because someone indoctrinated you doesn't mean you have to stick with it. But number two, you can really expose the fallacies and the bizarreness of it. Once you escape, because you know enough to be dangerous. You were so close on the inside, and I love. I don't know if you would agree with this, but in some ways, I think that has to me been one of the reasons that I suspect a lot of Christians don't try anymore to reach out to me, is because they know that you know so much that it's like, well, what else are we going to say to you? Kelly, has whatever. Preached it, shared it all, she's taught it. She's probably sung songs about it, written songs about it. She knows it inside and out. What are you going to tell her that she hasn't already preached? And at that point, you become a bit of a threat, and you certainly, it just is like, what are we going to say? She knows it all. If we needed the gospel to be preached to her, she could preach to herself.
Exactly.
And it's but I still struggle with the question of, just since I'm bringing it up, just the question of why they don't try harder to win you. Like it's like you really think I'm going to burn in hell, but you never talk to me about it anymore. I'm just like a write-off. But I think that's probably part of what's going on behind the scenes. But anyway.
There was one person that tried, and I was furious with him.
Yeah, I'm just right off. Now fuck up and take that night. With that fucking pole, now stick my dick up your whore's butt. and twist, you whore. God damn it. God fucking damn it. God fuck it. God fuck it. God fuck it. Get that goddamn knot out of you, slut. Come on, you whore. Dyke. It's time that Janet has Uzi arms him. Janet has Uzi arms. God damn, I know what the fuck motherfucker's gonna do. Bitch, suck my slut. I'm fucking you up. God damn it. God fucking damn it. Have I got Jewel Scott's arms? With Spitster. Now fuck up and overlook this. Slut. God damn it. God fucking damn it. I see a dick in your future. I see a dick. I see a dick in your future. I see a dick. 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 I'm gonna move my rook up here. He's gonna capture my rook. I'm gonna move my knight here and get his black ass and double checkmate. You can kiss that. You can kiss that king goodbye, you slut. Kiss that goddamn king goodbye, slut. And don't even think about trying to double up on your rook. I stick my dick up that rook's butt, and you'll have no choice but to take it, and I'll still put your black ass in checkmate, even if you are white. Spit, 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 spit. And if you move this fucking pawn down here looking for escape, I'll put your... Ah! 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 I fucked his. Ho! Damn, that was a beautiful white man's checkmate. That was beautiful. I fucked his. Ho! Oh, I'm biting my head at excitement. Damn, I fucked his butt. I fucked his butt. I fucked his butt. I fucked his butt. Be a Christian. Maybe you're not truly saved. If you're gonna be this way to me, yes. Yep. God's the same way. If you don't give him his due, he'll burn you. So why the hell should I not be the same way? So why in the hell should I not be the same way? God fucking damn it. God damn it. Bum! Donkey Kong! God damn it. God damn it. God fucking damn it. God fuck it.